Are you there, Adriana?
I am. I'm just waiting for.
Yes, we are online on YouTube.
Okay, good. Are we still there? So now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, it's everyone. Does everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, good. Okay, so welcome everyone for another fine seminar. My name is Adriana Maldonado Chaparro, and I am one of the co-hosts of the seminar. And I will be hosting the seminar today. I'm from Universidad del Rosario, and I'm also working with social behavior, mostly in mammals and birds. So first, I want to thank Isabella Capellini for her awesome talk last week on the evolution of parental care diversity in amphibians. She took us back into the evolutionary trend in social behavior, so that's pretty cool. Thank you, Isabella. And because we know some of you will look out as soon as the talk finish, we want to let you know next week we have Erin Siracusa. She'll be talking about social aging toward a deeper understanding of the intersection between sociality and senescence. And today we have Eli Strauss. Eli, he got a double PhD, a dual PhD, one in integrative biology and a second one in ecology, evolution, and behavior at Michigan State University in 2019. He is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior and the University of Constance, and he's also the co-director of the Mara Hyena project. In the fall, Eli is going to start his position as an assistant professor at Michigan State University. Congratulations on that, Eli. And his research mostly focused on understanding the evolution and ecology of social behavior, particular on dominance and inequality, asymmetry in power. Eli has been really successful in securing funding for his research, and also has a great publishing record. As you can tell from his CV, he has published in journals such as Animal Behavior, Journal of Animal Ecology, Philosophical Transactions, Proceedings of the National Academy, ProgB, and many others. Well, Eli also developed R packages for the analysis of dominance data, so you can check that out on his website, on R as well. And he's engaged in many activities that showed his commitment to the society. So he also acts as a reviewer for different journals, and he's engaging in press media as well. So I can keep talking about Eli and his awesome work, but with no further ado, I just want to introduce his seminar title, Exploring Nepotistic Societies with the Spotted Hyenas. Eli, the mic is all yours. And I'm going to stop sharing here.
Thank you, Adriana, for that lovely introduction. And thanks, everyone, for coming to my talk. I'm excited to share my work with you. So let me just get everything pulled up here. The usual Zoom dance. Okay, is everything looking good?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Just moving that out of the way. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to come speak at Fine. It's an honor to be part of this seminar series, which was a great relief to many of us in COVID when we were locked away, not able to see any scientific talks. So it's exciting to be on this side of the seminar series for once. So thank you very much. So today, as Adriana said, I'm going to be telling you about my work exploring the nepotistic societies with spotted hyenas. And I'd like to front load the thank yous here for the seminar, because the work that I'm going to present to you today is very much a team effort arising from the support of many different people, including especially the folks on the Mara Hyena project team, as well as our partners in Kenya, the funding bodies and institutions that have supported me, and my mentors and collaborators who have been supporting me throughout my scientific journey, and many research assistants, students, lab managers, etc., who have been part of the Mara Hyena project for many years. So thank you to all these people. It really would not have been possible to do any of this stuff without them. So I'm going to start the talk today with the story of King Henry VI. So King Henry VI was one of many kings in the Plantagenet royal family dynasty that ruled England for over 300 years. And if you're looking at this image of King Henry here and thinking he looks somewhat morose, you'd be correct because his story is not a particularly happy one. That said, it started pretty well. He ascended to the throne in England before his first birthday. And by the age of 10, he had also been crowned King of France following the success of the English in the 100 Years' War. So basically, through no action of his own, little King Henry here was one of the most powerful people in all of Europe. However, unfortunately for Henry and also for England, this lucky little boy grew up into a man who actually began to make choices as king, and he did not excel at his job. So as his reign bore on, dissatisfaction grew, and people began to wonder if England wouldn't be better off with a different king. The ever-ballooning royal family tree meant that there was no shortage of extended family who also had plausible claims to the crown. And one such powerful branch on this family tree was the House of York, led by the Duke of York, pictured here. So as King Henry's disastrous reign bore on, alliances began forming amongst the nobility, with some of them backing King Henry and others backing the Duke of York's claim to the throne. And supporters of each side jostled for power, with some allies losing their heads or their positions during this conflict between these two factions. And by the time King Henry was my age, England had erupted into a full-blown civil war. King Henry never lived to his 50th birthday because he, the Duke of York, and many of their supporters had been killed in the Civil War, which allowed for the rise of a new dynastic royal family that you may have heard of called the Tudors. So after over 300 years, this Plantagenet royal family dynasty consumed itself in a bloody contest for the top position in English society. So I'm telling you this story today because I hope that one thing you'll take away from my talk is that in the talk here where I'm exploring animal societies that, like these monarchies, show a system of social inheritance of status, we're going to see some of the same themes that have characterized this high drama of royal succession wars also playing out in these animal societies. So what are these animal societies that I'm speaking of? They're called nepotistic societies, and they share a couple of key socio-ecological features. They're typically large social groups consisting of multiple breeding females and their descendants, also called matrilines. And these species show female philopatry and male dispersal, where females remain within their group for their whole lives, forming long-lasting relationships, whereas males eventually disperse to join other groups. And the way that this operates in these different species is somewhat variable among the species. This produces heterogeneous kin relationships among group members, where some members of the group are closely socially bonded and are close kin, whereas other members of the group may be unrelated and not very closely socially bonded. And one important feature of these societies that we'll be talking about a lot today is maternal rank inheritance, where position in the social hierarchy is inherited by offspring. And I just want to dive into, in a little more detail, what this looks like. So maternal rank inheritance, under maternal rank inheritance, offspring acquire similar rank to their mothers, leading to this pattern of matrilineal grouping through the social hierarchy. So here's one example of social hierarchy. Individuals are arranged from the highest ranking to the lowest ranking. And you can see that the descendants from different matrilines are all grouped together in that social hierarchy. Many of these species also show youngest ascendancy, where new offspring inherit positions above their older siblings and below their mother. And I just want to make sure that it's clear that this contrasts with kind of the systems of inheritance that we're maybe most familiar with in many human monarchies, where the oldest offspring is the one who's first in line of succession. Here, it's the younger offspring that come to outrank their older siblings. And it's also important to note that this is a social and not a genetic inheritance process. And there's multiple lines of evidence that support this, but I think the most convincing one, in my opinion, is this paper by East et al., where they looked at the correlation in rank between adopted offspring and the rank of the genetic mother and the surrogate mother. So here in the top plot, you can see that there's not really any correlation between the rank of the adopted offspring and the rank of the genetic mother, but the rank of the surrogate mother is an extremely strong predictor of the rank of the adopted offspring, showing that it has something to do with the social environment and not anything to do with the genetics. And there's also a variety of evidence in these species that indicate that social alliances are playing an important role. One piece of evidence is that this process of maternal rank inheritance is facilitated by maternal support of the offspring. So mothers intervene on behalf of their offspring and support them in other ways. And if you take the mother away, it's often the case that offspring don't inherit the rank as you might expect under this pattern of maternal rank inheritance. Second, there are numerous case studies of matrilines cooperatively overthrowing other matrilines, particularly in captive groups of primates. And so here, this is indicative of the role that social alliances might be playing in facilitating competition among matrilines within these groups. And then finally, social environment manipulations have led to rank changes in groups where researchers can basically produce rank changes by manipulating the social alliances within the group. So I find these nepotistic societies to be fascinating for two reasons. First, I think on the surface, they appear to fly in the face of some fundamental evolutionary principles where individuals compete for opportunities for survival and opportunities to reproduce. Whereas in these societies, it appears as though rather than competing for the top positions in society, they're instead following these seemingly arbitrary rules of inheritance, dictating which ones get to be at the top of the social hierarchy and which ones don't. And second, I think even more mysterious is that these types of societies have evolved in exactly two clades. One is the Cercopithecine primates, the macaques and baboons and other Cercopithecines found in Africa and Asia. And the other is one species of social carnivore, the spotted hyena. So these clearly have very different ecologies and evolutionary histories. And yet here they're showing this exact same and very unique type of social structure. So in the talk today, I'm going to be aiming to address this broad question of how do nepotistic societies evolve. And my strategy for approaching this question is to break it down into three more manageable questions, which are what is the society like and what makes it that way? How does this type of society affect individuals? And then finally, what strategies emerge for navigating this society? So looking at some potential secondary adaptations that allow individuals to best navigate these social systems. And the data that I'll be presenting to you today comes from my colleagues and I working with the Mara Hyena Project, which is an individual-based study of spotted hyenas ongoing in Kenya since 1988. My colleagues and I collect data on the behavior and ecology of multiple social groups of hyenas. And over the many years of study here, we've collected data on over 8 generations of hyenas and over 480 complete lifespans. And I really think hyenas are going to be key to understanding the evolution of these nepotistic societies for a few reasons. First, they're clearly a case of convergent evolution, which I think in the case of the spotted hyenas in particular, suggests the hand of natural selection in shaping this particular social structure in this species. Second, they engage in frequent dyadic and polyadic dominance interactions, which allow us to observe the structure of these social hierarchies and also understand the processes underlying them. Third, rank really strongly affects fitness in females in this species. So here I'm showing you 2 plots indicating that. So on both of these plots, the x-axis shows the rank of individuals in the group, with lower ranking individuals being on the left. And here we see that that rank is negatively correlated with age at first parturition, so the onset of a reproductive career, where high-ranking individuals begin reproducing earlier. And they also reproduce at a higher rate, so producing more offspring per year. And we think this is primarily facilitated by differential access to food. So here we're looking at the social rank in a subgroup in relation to the probability of each of those individuals being observed feeding at a carcass. And so you can see here that when we're looking at one of these competitive feeding events at a carcass, the higher ranked individuals are much more likely to be observed feeding. And overall, this amounts to significant differences in lifetime reproductive success, where the highest ranked individuals have a lifetime reproductive success of around 3 times those of the lowest ranked individuals. So given all these strong effects of rank on fitness, you'd really expect that these animals would be competing for this high social position, these higher social positions in their societies. However, instead, they show this strict adherence to maternal rank inheritance. So here I'm going to show you a couple, here I'm going to show you a video. In this video, the highest ranked female is depicted in the back here. And she had recently been attacked by a lion and was severely injured with a broken pelvis. However, despite her injury, you can see that she is hobbling her way in here and has no issue accessing the carcass and displacing other individuals. So here, although she's clearly not able to compete as well as maybe some of the other members of her group in a one-on-one sort of individualistic prowess type of contest, she nevertheless retains her high status and the benefits of high rank. If we look at the rank of onset of adulthood for juveniles and the mother's rank, we see that that juveniles tend to acquire the rank of their mother exactly as expected according to maternal rank inheritance. In fact, almost 80% of the time, we can predict the exact set of hyenas that will be dominated by one juvenile and the exact set of hyenas that will come to dominate that one. So they're really quite strictly adhering to this principles of maternal rank inheritance with youngest ascendancy. And what this produces is interactions that look something like this. So here you're going to see a video of a younger sibling showing dominance towards his much larger older sister, who will be behaving submissively. So here you can see the smaller hyena has its ears cocked forward and its tail bristled, and it's biting at the shoulders and then back of this adult female who's tucking her tail and fleeing, showing submission. So obviously, despite the fact that this female is much larger and able to dominate her younger brother, she's still acknowledging his superior dominant status in this context, following the rules of maternal rank inheritance. So by observing sequences of these interactions like the one we just saw, we can tabulate wins and losses among individuals to infer the structure of a dominance hierarchy. And I'd like to take a small detour here to talk about this process of dominance hierarchy inference. So dominance hierarchy research has its origins in this paper coming from 1922, in which the author Thorleif Schjelderup Eby wrote, "Anyone who thinks the inhabitants of a chicken yard are thoughtless, happy creatures with the daily life of undisturbed pleasure is thoroughly mistaken. A grave seriousness lies over the chicken yard." So what he is alluding to here is that by observing chickens interacting and tabulating which ones were able to get the special issue, as there's a number of great review and empirical papers relating to all things dominance. So that aside, over the 100 year. But more recently, myself and a number of others have become more interested in understanding not just the order of individuals in the group, but also how that order might change over time. But the idea being that by examining so I call these dynamic hierarchies longitudinal hierarchies, and they characterize the ranks of individuals at any given time point, plus the dynamics that they experience between different time points. And I plot a longitudinal hierarchy with a plot looking like this, where each line corresponds to the rank of one individual over time. So we can plot basically the dominance trajectory of each individual across their lifespan. And I think understanding the dynamics of these systems is really important for a number of reasons. And one of them is that there are multiple processes that can give rise to dynamics in dominance hierarchies. And to explain those, let's turn back to this simple linear order that I showed you on the left. And let's imagine that Zeke fancies himself to be the highest ranked member of the group. So what are the ways in which Zeke could become this highest ranked member? Well, there are exactly two options for how this could unfold. First, Zeke could challenge Dave and attempt to overtake him in the social hierarchy. And if successful, Zeke would overtake Dave, Dave would become number 2, and Zeke would become the new number 1. Alternatively, if Dave were to die, for instance, due to a respiratory disease, then Zeke would be left as the new number 1 in the social group. So I call these two types of dynamics active dynamics and passive dynamics, where active dynamics involve these challenging type of interactions, where individuals reverse some previously held relationship. And this results from status-seeking behavior, like the challenge that I just described. And we can identify these active dynamics as cases where lines are crossing in the plot. In contrast, passive dynamics involve no reversal of any previously held relationships, and these instead result from demographic turnover. So these you can think of as somewhat invisible changes in that an animal can, without changing any of its relationships with its group mates, find itself either being pushed up or down the social hierarchy as other members of the group are added or subtracted. And we can mathematically calculate the contribution of these two different processes to the total change that an individual experiences to understand how these two processes might be shaping the way animals move through their social hierarchies over the course of their lives. So that concludes our detour. So coming back to where we were before, I was here observing interactions between some hyenas to try and infer the structure of a dominance hierarchy. And so this is what I've done for much of the work that I'll be showing you today. By observing interactions like the one we see on the left here, and assigning winners and losers to those interactions, we can infer the structure of longitudinal hierarchies for 4 study groups over almost 30 years from our long-term data. So in the talk today, I'm going to be showing you this longitudinal hierarchy, which we now can see on the right side of the plot here, and using this to address these 3 questions of what is society like and what makes it that way, how does this type of society affect individuals, and what strategies might emerge for navigating these societies. And I'm going to present to you my results in 2 chapters. The first one I'm calling Coups, Coalition, and Competition, which is going to focus on these active dynamics. And the second we'll call Demographic Drivers of Dynasties, which focuses more on the passive dynamics. So diving into the first section here, I mentioned earlier that social alliances are thought to play an important role in these societies. So in this study, we want to test this hypothesis that nepotistic societies are underpinned by competition via social alliances, using our longitudinal hierarchies in these 4 groups of hyenas. And in hyenas, we're specifically the sort of alliances we're focusing on are specifically these coalitionary interactions. These are temporary alliances that form between 2 or more individuals during an agonistic encounter like the one you see here. So in this scenario, we have 2 individuals on the left with their tails bristled, their ears are cocked forward, and you can see that they're moving towards this individual on the right. These are showing characteristic dominance postures, whereas the one on the right is showing a characteristic subordination posture with its ears plastered back, its tail is tucked between the legs, and its back is sort of hunched over. So we expect to see, so we're using these coalitionary alliances as a lens into the underlying social alliances in these social groups. And this hypothesis makes a few predictions that we're going to go and test. The first is that coalitions should typically be in concordance with the dominance hierarchy. So if these coalitions are the kind of force that are underlying the structure of these dominance hierarchies, then in most cases, then the structure of these coalitions and the structure of the dominance hierarchy should generally be in agreement. The second prediction is that when there are coalitions directed up the hierarchy or so not in agreement with the social hierarchy, this should lead to change. And then the third prediction is that if we know something about the coalition networks of a group, we should then be able to predict the individual active dynamics that individuals will experience in those groups. So let's go through and test these predictions. First, we found for prediction number 1 that in fact, the vast majority of these coalitions were reinforcing the hierarchy rather than challenging it. So this is in line with what we expected to see here. For prediction number 2, we focused in on these cases of coalitions that challenged the hierarchy. And we found that in 2/3 of those cases, one or both of the individuals doing the challenging ended up overtaking the one being challenged, suggesting that these coalitions are associated with change. These challenging coalitions are associated with change in the dominance hierarchy. And then finally, we assembled coalition networks, like the example one I'm showing you here. In these networks, each node is one adult female in the group. The ties between the nodes correspond to the frequency of coalitionary alliances between those individuals. And we found that connectedness in this network predicted the probability that individuals would challenge the social hierarchy, and also that we could predict to some degree the rise and fall that individuals would experience as a function of their connectedness in these coalitionary networks, where those who were more strongly connected with their top allies were more likely to move up the social hierarchy. So overall, this lends support to the idea that these coalitionary alliances are kind of the mechanistic process that's underlying these nepotistic dominance hierarchies. We next wanted to ask, were there fitness consequences to these changes? So here we calculated the expected n-fold change in lifetime reproductive success resulting from each one of these cases of active dynamics. And so to orient you to this plot, both the size of the point and the color of the point indicates the magnitude of that expected change in lifetime reproductive success. And there's a couple of different ways in which these changes can vary. They can vary in the magnitude of the number of positions moved, and they can vary in the location of the hierarchy where the individual ended up. And what you see is that there's a lot of variation in the expected fitness consequences of changes, where particularly where small magnitude changes, especially low and in the middle of the hierarchy, are expected to have fairly minimal effects on fitness, whereas high magnitude changes are expected to have large effects on fitness, and particularly those that are occurring at the upper echelons of the social hierarchy. So overall, the conclusion here is that while there's a lot of variation in the fitness consequences of these changes, some of them had quite large effects, either halving or over doubling expected lifetime reproductive success. So turning back to our 3 questions, we can begin to fill in some answers here. I asked, what is society like and what makes it that way? And I've shown you some evidence that in these societies, competition over social status occurs via coalitionary alliances, and that most of these alliances reinforce the status quo. However, sometimes these alliances challenge the status quo, and when this happens, this can lead to active dynamics that can have large effects on fitness. So for the remainder of this section here, I want to focus in on this 3rd question. What strategies might emerge for navigating these types of societies? One thing that my colleagues and I explored is this hypothesis in the literature that infanticide by females may have evolved as a mechanism for competition among matrilines in nepotistic societies. So we decided to, once again, use our long-term data set to investigate this hypothesis. So we went through all of our juvenile mortality data and tabulated the cause of death for in each case. So what you can see here are the roughly 6 leading causes of death, with the others kind of lumped into an other category at the bottom here. And you may not be surprised to see that the vast majority of cases, we did not know the cause of death for the juvenile. And I think this is pretty typical for any study of mortality. However, what we did find is that there was some age structuring to the different sources of mortality. And we decided to use this age structuring to do some inference about what may have happened in these cases where we didn't know what happened. So specifically what we did is we fit a Bayesian multinomial model, modeling the cause of death as a function of age at death. And then we used this model to generate predictions for all of the cases where we didn't know the cause of death. And what we concluded is that the two leading causes of juvenile mortality were infanticide and lions. And specifically, we found that infanticide accounted for roughly 24% of juvenile mortality. Additionally, we found that it was always committed by females, so none of our recorded infanticide events were committed by males. We also found that typically the ones committing the infanticide were a very high rank, whereas the mothers who are experiencing infanticide could be of various ranks. And finally, we found that killers were often supported by allies. So here you're seeing a screen grab from a video of one of these infanticide events. Here's the highest ranked member of this highest ranked female in the group, and she's attacking and about to kill the cub of one of the other members of the group. And the mother of this cub is actually present here, although you can't see her. She's off screen, but she began to intervene, coming this way to try and get involved in this interaction. But here you see the killer's two adult daughters who are running and chasing away the mother in this interaction. So overall, we found that that these data generally were in line with this prediction that infanticide by females may have evolved as a mechanism for protecting offspring social status by removing potential rivals. So if these juveniles are at high risk of infanticide, then why is it such a common sight to see many juveniles associating or socializing outside of the safety of their den, like you see here? This was the next question that I'll be investigating here in the talk. And I think that the answer to this question lies in the fact that rank acquisition poses a challenging social development task. So these juveniles need to figure out where they rank relative to their peers, and then ultimately also how they rank relative to other members of the group. And failing to acquire as high of a rank as they possibly can could lead to some negative fitness consequences. As I've already shown you, rank has a strong effect on fitness in this system. So we wanted to ask with this, in this section, is there selection on juvenile social development? And to do this, we observed interactions among juveniles across a developmental window. So here I'm going to show you data on interactions from 7 different juveniles. I've arranged them according to their maternal rank. So cub number 1 has the highest ranking mother, whereas cub number 7 has the lowest ranking mother. And by observing interactions, dominance interactions across the early developmental window, we can see that early on, there's lots of interactions directed both up and down this maternal hierarchy. But that as time goes on, those up hierarchy aggressions are extinguished, leaving only down hierarchy aggressions, indicating how these cubs have learned, sort of had their ranks come to align with the maternal hierarchy. So as we observe these dominance interactions across development, we can track the rank of each individual using the ELO score here. So you can see as they're figuring it out, some of them go up and down, but by the end of it, the juveniles have roughly ended up in accordance with the maternal hierarchy. However, you will note that there are some individuals that in this plot here, individuals 3 and 4 appear to be struggling to inherit their rank as we'd expect according to maternal rank inheritance, because they should be ranked up here above number 5 and 6, but their ELO scores are lower than we would expect according to these rules of maternal rank inheritance. So this is the variation that we are using to investigate fitness consequences of social development in this study. So the first thing we asked was, is it the case that if we find that individuals are struggling to inherit their rank at the end of this when they reach den dependence, which is when the end of this developmental window that we're looking at here. So if they're struggling to inherit their rank, does this mean that they ultimately fail to inherit the rank as expected? And we found that that was not the case. So here, regardless of whether they had a lower ELO score than expected or not, basically everyone acquired the rank expected according to the rules of maternal rank inheritance. So it seems like this variation here does not lead to permanent differences in the process of rank inheritance. Nevertheless, we found that these individuals who were struggling to inherit their rank showed significant fitness consequences, paid some significant fitness costs in the form of survival. So here in this plot, the green lines indicate those who were underperforming their ELO score at the end of their den-dependent period. And you can see that they have a significantly reduced survival compared to those who were meeting or exceeding their expected ELO score according to the rules of maternal rank inheritance. So overall, this provides evidence for potential selection favoring social activity during the juvenile period to help facilitate this process, the sort of more optimal process of social development. So turning back to our key slide here, we can begin to answer this question: what strategies emerge for navigating this type of society? First, I showed you some evidence suggesting that infanticide by females may have evolved as a mechanism for competition over social status in this species. And also that, secondarily, that there's potential selection on social development, favoring juveniles who are developing and inheriting their rank more accurately or more quickly. Okay, so this ends chapter 1 of the talk, focusing on these active dynamics, but let's move on now to demographic drivers of dynamics in this system. So far, as I said, we've been focusing on these active dynamics, but if we tabulate how much change each individual experiences over their lifespan, we can see that and that's what's depicted on the x-axis here, where 0.5 means changing through half of the entire hierarchy. We can see that, in fact, that active dynamics typically have a fairly small net change on individuals' total lifetime dynamics, whereas most of the dynamics they experience are due to passive processes, due to these processes of demographic turnover. So here the question I'm asking is, how do these different types of dynamics shape an individual's trajectory through their dominance hierarchy? And to answer this question, we've turned back to our longitudinal hierarchies. And from this, I'm going to extract a couple pieces of information. First, I extract each individual's dominance trajectory, which corresponds to the full changes that they experienced over the course of their lifespan. So that's simply can be viewed as one of these lines in the plot. Next, as I noted earlier, we can mathematically calculate the different contributions of these two processes to the overall dynamics and individual experience. So what I did is I calculated these contributions of these two processes and then added them to an individual starting rank to extract a hypothetical trajectory that an individual would have experienced had they only experienced changes due to status-seeking behavior, and then another hypothetical trajectory charting the changes they would have experienced had they only experienced passive dynamics resulting from demographic turnover. So then, armed with these three trajectories, the empirical one showing what they experienced and these two hypothetical ones, I fit Markov models that modeled the movement through the social hierarchy that the animals experience under each of these three types of trajectories. And from these models, I generated expected lifetime dominance trajectories for individuals starting at different ranks. So in this plot here, each line corresponds to one decile in the hierarchy. So the top line is the top 10% of the hierarchy, and the second line is the 10th to 20th percentile of the hierarchy, etc. So what you can see is that in the model fit with the actual dominance trajectories that each individual experienced, we see these slanting lines indicate that individuals are declining in rank over time. And another way to visualize the output of these Markov models is to create a steady state, to plot these steady state probabilities, which correspond to the probability of occupying any of these positions in the social hierarchy if you ran this process to infinity. And a simple way to interpret these plots is that the larger the bars here, the more strongly they are, individuals are being pulled to that section of the hierarchy. So these lines are slanting down, indicating that individuals are expected to decline in rank over time, kind of regardless of where they start in the social hierarchy. And the steady state probabilities indicate that individuals are being pulled towards the bottom of the hierarchy. So now we have the pattern, but let's try and understand which of these processes is giving rise to that pattern. So I repeated this analysis using these two different hypothetical trajectories. And what I found is that while the hypothetical trajectories resulting from active dynamics did not lead to any downward decline, the passive dynamics did, where it seems as though this process of demographic turnover is causing individuals to be pulled towards the bottom of the social hierarchy. Okay, so passive dynamics are driving individuals to decline in rank over time, but why would that be the case? Why does demographic turnover cause a decline in rank? To answer this question, I turned to simulations, where I could simulate social groups of hyenas to turn off various aspects of their societies to try and answer this question. And specifically, I focused on two processes operating in hyena society: rank-related reproduction, where high-ranking individuals have higher reproductive success, and rank inheritance, this process of passing rank from mother to offspring. And I focused on these two processes in particular because they're both involved with the way that new individuals are added to the group. So they're both involved in this process of demographic turnover. So I simulated digital hyenas that reproduce and die. That I parameterized these simulations based on our the hyena data from our long-term study. Importantly, I simulated no competition for status or no interactions at all, even among these individuals. So all the changes that we'll see in these plots are due only to demographic turnover. And then finally, I repeated the Markov model analysis that we just walked through. So I simulated 4 types of societies, including all combinations of the presence and absence of rank inheritance and rank-related reproduction. So first, let's look at the hyena-like society that has both. Here, reassuringly, we see a pattern similar to what we observe in the analysis arising from the empirical data. Individuals are declining in rank over time. They're being pulled towards the bottom of the hierarchy. So what happens if we turn off rank inheritance and rank-related reproduction? In this case, we see a very different pattern. Now, instead of being pulled towards the bottom of the hierarchy, we instead see a regression to the mean, where the addition and subtraction of individuals kind of leads other members of the group to be jostled around, and their ranks tend to converge towards the middle, becoming more similar to each other. And to make a long story short, the presence of only one of each of these two processes was not sufficient to cause this decline in rank over time. So to summarize these results, what I've shown you is that demographic turnover in a typical scenario causes a regression to the mean, with individuals becoming more similar in rank over time as a result of the addition and subtraction of members of the group. However, if we add in rank inheritance and rank-related reproduction, this changes the way that demographic turnover impacts individuals, instead causing them to decline in rank, leading to this pattern of a regression to the bottom. And one interesting thing to note here is that I've been grouping individuals by their decile in the social hierarchy. But if we tease some of these individuals apart, there's one who escapes these processes, this process of decline due to passive dynamics, and that's the queen. And the simple reason for that is that nobody can inherit a position higher than the highest ranking female. So here, the second line now corresponds to everyone in the top 10% of the hierarchy except the highest ranked female. And you see that they show the same pattern as everyone else where they decline in rank over time. However, the highest ranked female does not decline in rank over time and keeps her high status for the duration of her life. So I think this adds to, a bunch of other interesting tidbits of evidence suggesting that there's something fundamentally different about being at the top of the hierarchy versus being among the top of the hierarchy. Okay, and then so far I've been talking about how these processes operate over individual lifespans, but there's actually no reason why these processes would end at an individual's lifespan, because of this process of inheritance, these demographic changes can accumulate across generations. And to show you that, I'm going to take this longitudinal hierarchy from our longest studied social group here, and I'm going to color each of these lines according to their membership, or according to their descent from one of a few females in the 80s. And what you can see is that this process of decline over time occurs at the matriline scale, as well as lifetime scale. So to see this clearly, you can focus on the individual named DJ here. She's ranked number 3 in the late 80s, which is a pretty good spot to be. However, by the mid 20-teens, all of her descendants are ranked fairly low in the social hierarchy, and it's not because they've been overtaken by other matrilines. Instead, they've just been pushed down as the KB matriline is experiencing high levels of reproductive success, and all those new individuals are added to the top of the hierarchy instead of elsewhere. Okay, so coming back to our key slide, in the previous chapter, I showed you that alliances primarily reinforce the status quo. And I think that as a result of this, almost the majority of dynamics that individuals experience are due to these demographic processes rather than due to active dynamics. And I've also shown you that rank inheritance and rank-related reproduction change the way that these demographic processes affect individuals. So how does this type of society affect individuals? It causes individuals and their descendants to decline in rank over their lifespans, with the exception of the queen, who gets to keep her high status. I think this has some pretty interesting implications for life history strategies and the way that individuals might be strategically adjusting their status-seeking behavior as well. But this is something that I'm interested in exploring in some future work. So this concludes the sort of main chapter of my talk today. But before I finish up, I want to touch on a couple of different things. First, I want to give you a bit of a teaser of my upcoming work. So we talked a lot today about social alliances in this species. But one thing that struck me as I've been studying these animals is that the spatial arrangement among individuals plays a huge role in the way that they carry out and experience their societies. So in the case of this example here, in order for these two individuals to engage in a coalitionary alliance together, they have to first be close enough to each other to actually initiate this alliance. And I think that this is actually a process operating across all sorts of different animals, that the way that animals experience their social environment has a lot to do with their movement and spatial relations to each other. So even in this example of a tightly packed group of monkeys, there's variation in the social environment experienced by these two individuals, arising in one way from their centrality within the group. So this one is kind of located on the periphery where they may be less surrounded by individuals, where this one is more centrally located. And we can also think about the identities of the individuals that are nearby as a potential constraint on the types of social interactions that they may engage in. So I think this movement and spatial structuring of groups is a really super important and understudied aspect of social structure. But the reason it's understudied is quite understandable. It's very difficult to measure the kind of fluid and continuous motion of many individuals simultaneously. However, just because it's hard to measure doesn't mean it's not important. And I think as you move to species that are kind of more dispersed across the landscape, the effect of the spatial environment becomes even more important as the distances among individuals become more dramatic and take longer to change. So over the last few years, my colleagues and I have been assembling what I think is like the perfect data set for addressing this question. And we've been doing it in the hyena system, which is a society that's spread out quite dispersed across the landscape. So what we've done here is we've deployed GPS audio and accelerometer, collecting collars on all individuals in one social group. And what this is providing for us is this unprecedented look into the real-time movement decisions and social and movement decisions of individuals in one of these highly dispersed groups. And just to emphasize how dispersed they are, the box that you're looking at here is around 50 square kilometers. So these individuals are often kilometers apart, sometimes even kilometers from the nearest member of their social group. So despite the fact that they spend some large amounts of time far away from their group members, they also at times gather together in large groups. They'll sometimes travel together in smaller subgroups. And as I've been discussing with you today, they really have complex and vibrant social lives. So here we're trying to understand the way that these movement decisions are playing into that complex social structure. So for instance, one of the questions that we're interested in is how are individuals coordinating their movement over these large distances? And this is where the audio data is super useful. So here I'm going to show you a similar type of animation, but now each individual is going to light up when they emit one of their long distance calls. So here you can see that by deploying these GPS units and audio recorders on each individual, we can really collect not just the movements of individuals, but also the behavioral and communicative contexts that are driving that movement. So the types of questions that are upcoming are examining coordination among social partners, the processes of social attraction and avoidance, and communication and information flow. So if you're interested in these types of questions, please stay tuned because we're hoping to have some of our first results from this study coming out later this year. So that's a teaser of my upcoming work. And I just want to end by noting that as Adriana noted at the head of the talk, I will be starting an assistant professor position at Michigan State University and looking to build up my lab group there. And I'm looking to recruit members of the lab in starting later this year or next year. And specifically, I'll be looking for 1 to 2 graduate students or postdocs and 1 to 2 data technicians or lab managers. So if you are interested in any of these positions, please contact me because I would love to talk to you. And please also share this with anyone who you think may be interested. And with that, I will put up my sort of keynote slide here, and I'll be happy to move to the question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Eli, for such a great talk. So this is time for questions now. I just posted on our message or chat window the rules for now. We started a new trend last week with the question mark follow-up question. So we're going to try to keep up with the follow-up questions, so bear with us. And for those on YouTube, remember, just type your questions and then Carsten will basically tell us about them. We do have the first question, Delphine. And just as a reminder, we are trying to build community, so please just state your name, your affiliation, and a little bit of what you work on. Okay, Delphine.
Okay, I'll start. Thanks, Adriana. Thanks, Eli, for a really, really nice talk, as always. So I'm Delphine, I'm a postdoc. I've recently switched locations. I'm now with Jenny Tang at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig. It's nice to meet all of you virtually. My question is a bit of a tricky one, and I'm sorry, Eli, I know that you focus mostly on the nepotistic coalitions, but as you had your key slide here, I started to try to think what would happen if the coalitionary alliances aren't between kin? How does this change the entire picture that you are building up here? And I know that that's a little bit of a mean question, so I apologize for that, but can you help me think through how that would look like?
No, it's a good question. And yeah, I didn't dive into the kinship aspect in this talk too much because for that study, we didn't have kinship information on all of the individuals in the group. But there's been a good amount of work on this in like the Cercopithecines, looking at the role of kinship in the social bonds and the alliances formed in those species. So yeah, they definitely do form alliances with non-kin at times. It's just less common. It's more common that they form these kin. They're more likely to ally with their kin, but it's certainly not exclusive. And so I think that those processes can also be operating in these societies. I'll unshare my screen. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so I think yeah, there's definitely there's no limit to these effects, to these processes operating only among kin. Because I think kin is a major structuring. Yeah, kinship really structures these social alliances. In general, they tend to follow these kind of matrilineal kinship. So I don't think that, I guess to back up, I don't think that despite the fact that non-kin alliances do occur, it doesn't really, I think, overwhelm the sort of effect of kinship in these systems.
Thank you.
Thanks, Delphine. Our next question comes from Eduardo.
Thank you, Adriana. Eduardo Fernandez Duque from Yale University. Thank you, Eli, so much. I loved it. I learned a lot. I have so many things in my mind that I've been trying to see how I can state something clearly. I will begin by the fact that I could not remember a single graph where the fitted regression line is as close to the line as the one you showed us for maternal rank and inherited rank. I mean, it really make you think of inheritance of eye color, not of social rank. So I see those lines, and then you're explaining us that everything suggests that there's no genetic component. You mentioned you showed us some data on surrogates, but I just want to confirm. My understanding is that those are not hyenas. That's another system. You also told us this could be convergent evolution. So, and then there's social development by the juveniles, which is, if there's variation in the extent to which the juveniles learn how to acquire rank, one would imagine that how do you identify some genetic component to all this? I mean, the regression line, it would be one of a kind if this is only the environment, such a fit. And then there's the development. And so can you help us understand a little bit more, even if you don't have the data, what you think is happening along trying to address those points?
Sure, yeah. So the plot that you're referring to, that East et al. Paper, is actually in hyenas. So so in hyenas, it's not super common, but it does happen that a mother will basically adopt an offspring that is not her own. And as that plot showed, basically in all cases, the juvenile ends up acquiring the rank of the adoptive mother, following these exact same rules of maternal rank inheritance, but now the mother is not actually the genetic mother. So that I think it's sort of the perfect way to test this question about what the role that genes might be playing in shaping the acquisition of rank. And I think that it provides some pretty strong evidence that it's really about the social environment and about the transmission of social ties from mother to offspring. I don't think that there's no role of individual differences or genetics in the process of social development. And I think that it must be operating in some way, but I think that it's just overwhelmed by this very strong and predictable pattern of maternal rank inheritance with youngest ascendancy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. Our next question comes from Beniamino.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for the great talk. There was something that I was wondering, when matriline basically goes extinct within a group, do the infant males that have left the group coming from that matriline, do they have also very reduced fitness, or the low-ranking matriline can scrape a bit of fitness from their males that go to other groups?
Yeah, good question. So yes, because you've identified that by the reproduction the male offspring are leaving the group and are not acquiring this rank for a very long period of time. So it's true that they can salvage some reproductive success via male offspring. However, there's also evidence that even after they leave to join a new group, males show varying reproductive success varying success in the joining of new group as a function of their maternal rank. So although they join a new group where the sort of effects of mother's rank is no longer present, there's still kind of the lingering effects of that maternal rank that follow them to the new group. So to answer your question, yes, even when a match line goes extinct, there can still be some sort of descendants of theirs via the males that have emigrated to other groups. However, this process of rank-related reproduction or rank effects on reproductive success still operates via those males.
Thanks. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Suleima, I'm going to give you.
Okay. Suleima Tang Martinez, retired from the University of Missouri, St. Louis. I think the first question I had, I think was just answered, but just to be safe, essentially the video you showed was a young male, youngest male in the matriarchy, and he was dominant over his sister. But once that male is gone, the sister, females are in general dominant to the males, correct? And so that dominance of the young male to its sister would only be very temporary. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the
Until it
dominance.
leaves.
Yeah, the dominance of that male to his sister will basically last for the duration of his tenure in the group.
Okay.
At some point, once he reaches reproductive maturity, he will begin moving towards the process of dispersal. He'll disperse to join a new group, and there he will be lower ranking than the females and their descendants that are in that group. And so the question of how he ranks relative to his sister is kind of no longer relevant.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. And then the other question I had is that it seems that this drop in dominance for everybody other than the queen, it seems to me that the very fact that you have the youngest ascendancy, that in itself would drive everybody to go down over time, right? Because every time a new individual, let's just look at the females, a new female is born into the group, then that female will assume a rank right under her mother. So the previous number 2 ranking female in whichever matriarchy, let's say the alpha matriarchy, that individual will then drop. And so just by the normal process of reproduction and the youngest ascendancy, that would cause everybody to decline, correct?
Yes, although it's actually, I think I'd argue that it's actually more about the rank inheritance than the youngest ascendancy. So I have a plot that I didn't include in the main talk, but in that study, I also simulated other types of societies, like let's imagine instead of youngest ascendancy, hyenas had primogeniture, where the older sibling is the one that takes the highest spot. It still causes everyone to decline in rank over time, but it's declined slower because, as you say, because of the processes you just said. So basically, with youngest ascendancy within the matriline, new individuals push their older siblings down, and if you get rid of youngest ascendancy, that no longer happens. So once a hyena is born, they're never going to be outranked by anyone else in their matriline. However, because this process operates across matrilines as well, the matrilines above them, the reproduction that's going on there will also push everyone down still. So this process of decline happens whether it's youngest ascendancy or whether it's primogeniture. And the other thing actually that I would add is that I also simulated societies that have a general parent-offspring correlation in status, because so far I've been talking about this kind of what I think is a very social process of transfer, from parent to offspring, but there's a lot of other processes that can cause similarity in parents and offspring in terms of their social status, including just plain old genetics. And so that we expect this to be operating in a much wider variety of species. And we see the exact same pattern under those circumstances. If there's parent-offspring correlation in rank, and there's rank-related reproductive success, then this causes, in general, individuals to be pushed down through the social hierarchy. So I think that's a way in which kind of what is maybe a little bit of a niche thing specific to the Cercopithecines and the hyenas here is actually operating in a much wider variety of species.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Really fascinating talk, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suleima. So I'm going to ask my question and then I'll move to Michael. So now that you touched the two groups that have this type of society inheritance, I was wondering, why do we only have these two groups in which this inheritance dominance hierarchy evolved? And they are quite separate one from each other, right? Like hyenas are in the carnivores and these are primates. So why do you think it appears in hyenas? And do you think this is just because we don't know anything or basically nothing from other species and it should be more widespread? Or is it something in particular about these two groups that just gave the correct conditions for this type of society to evolve?
Yeah, I love this question. I think I think I don't have a satisfying answer for why these two groups and not others. But what I can say is that there's a couple of things that seem to be really necessary. First, like female philopatry is really important because of to allow females to form these long-lasting relationships. And also it's important that they have overlapping generations so that there's the opportunity for mothers and offspring to live together for extended periods of time. And so this is operating in both the Cercopithecines and in the spotted hyenas. Yeah, the spotted hyenas also have a number of other kind of interestingly primate-like life history traits, like they have small litters. They invest very heavily in nursing, so they wean very late compared to relative to other carnivores. So it seems like there's a general pattern of increased investment in offspring in hyenas that could be playing a role here as well. In particular, hyenas take a really long time for their jaws to develop, and those jaws are critical for cracking open bones and generally feeding quickly, which is important during the context of competitive feeding events like carcasses. And so it seems like this appears to have been a driver of increased investment by females in their offspring. In terms of, is it just so we don't know much about other species? We know actually kind of a lot about a lot of different carnivore societies. And so the hyenas are extremely unique in terms of this, and not because we don't know what's going on with wild dogs and cheetahs and lions. We know what's going on there, and they just don't show anything like this. So I think that's what we know. Yeah, I think for me, I'm still not sure why exactly in these set of species and others and not others does this process happen.
Interesting, because now I think about the marmots and matrilines, and they sort of also share space, but they don't have a late reproduction. So I wonder, and the data is there. So if you can talk to Dan, probably. Thank you. Michael?
Yes, thank you. Michael Dabrowski, University of Bern. I'm interested in social evolution. My question is closely related to Adriana's question, actually. I'm not so sure whether rank inheritance is really that rare and only confined to Cercopithecine monkeys and hyenas. I must admit that I don't know the literature on rank organization very well, but I remember, for example, in grey-leg geese, there has been shown that the young inherit the rank of the pair that they are traveling with, and they are usually the offspring of that pair. But it may be different in sort of closed societies, like in the monkeys and hyenas. So I think to really understand the conditions under which rank inheritance, even if it's not maternal, but perhaps parental more generally, has any effect on the social structure, it would be important to know in which context rank is really important, whether it's food acquisition, competition for partners, competition for other resources like shelter and things like that. So I don't know whether in Cercopithecine monkeys there is sufficient variance in what resources are important and also in related rank inheritance issues. Do you know the literature well enough to comment on that?
So I'll do your second point first. Yeah, there is variation in feeding ecology across the Cercopithecines that could be relevant here. I think what we're missing in a lot of ways is like a good quantitative measure of the extent of maternal rank inheritance, because although this is sort of described as characteristic of the Cercopithecines, and I think it is, there's a lot of variation among species, and this variation has not been particularly well quantified across the species. And so especially to facilitate comparison among species, I think I would love to work towards a way of measuring like how well does this particular species or does this particular group follow the expected pattern of maternal rank inheritance. And I think that this is something that is achievable. There's lots of long-term studies, lots of people doing research in the Cercopithecines. And it's, I think in some ways a bit of a quantitative challenge, but also just a matter of data wrangling and bringing people together who have the data sets to be able to ask this question, which is something that I would love to do at some point. And then to your first point about, and sorry, related to resource, like what they're competing over, I think then we can sort of begin to ask those questions. Does it have to do with the types of resources that they're competing over? But to maybe provide an anecdote that perhaps runs counter to that is that we see this type of maternal rank inheritance in hyenas, where they're killing these large ephemeral ungulates and then scrambling to eat them as fast as possible, engaging in a lot of competition over that food. And we also see it in gelato monkeys that are actually just grazing on grass. So there's really very little. There's quite a big difference there in the types of resources that are being competed for, or at least in terms of the food resources. So I think anyway, I think that's an interesting hypothesis to investigate. And then to your first point about rank inheritance occurring more broadly, I agree with what you're saying, but I think I would just try and draw some distinctions around this type of rank inheritance. Like I think that parent-offspring correlations in rank are very common, like as you mentioned in the gray lag geese, and I think also in some like in the capuchins as well. But I think it's not the same process. I think a different process is operating there. So if I were to have my the pick of my data set to play around with, I would love to start by doing some of these asking some of these comparative questions in the Cercopithecines and the hyenas, focusing on maternal rank inheritance with youngest ascendancy, and then broaden out from there to include, okay, what about parent-offspring correlations in rank more generally? Because I agree that is a much broader and probably more relevant question for lots of species.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael. Sari?
Hello, I'm Sari van Belle, and I study black howler monkeys, or the social system of black howler monkeys in Mexico. Thank you very much for your interesting talk. I want to first have kind of a follow-up question from Adriana, in that the question was comparing between the Cercopithecines and hyenas. But what about the other species of hyenas? What do we know about them in terms of kind of this inheritance and the rank relatedness and all that? But my other question was, when you showed the graph of like long-term observation of that one group in which the third female got dropped down in rank. At one point, it should be beneficial for these lower rank matrilines to split off of these group and start all over again in hopes of getting higher ranks. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what factors into like the splitting of the groups.
Yeah. So a few years after that plot ends, that group does in fact split into multiple groups. So you're right that you would expect that to eventually happen. And in terms of what factors into those splits, we don't have enough of them in our data set to really answer that question as yet. I don't think. Only in that I think we have like something around 6 or 7 of these splits, and they've operated relatively differently. So in one case, there was sort of people began herding their cattle right through the center of one of the hyena territories. And lo and behold, a few years later, the clan split right along that border. So that is a process that operated in that situation, but didn't operate in the other splits that we've observed. But also like in that group that we were just looking at, the group was growing over a long period, as you could see in the plot. And at some point it got so big that they ended up splitting into multiple groups. And this is a question that one of Kay's graduate students is actually currently working on, asking about how are these females making decisions about which group to join, and is there potentially the opportunity for them to make these decisions strategically to improve their position in society. So that's a good question. And then your first question was about multiple species of hyenas, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so there's 4 extant groups of species of hyenas, and this maternal rank inheritance doesn't operate in any of the other 3, but also there's a lot they're socially quite different, those other 3 species of hyenas. So one of them is the aardwolf, which is not particularly social, so they're not living in these big multi-male, multi-female groups. And in fact, the striped and brown hyenas are also not living in groups that are quite as large and complex as the spotted hyena groups. There's not really quite the opportunity for this matrilineal rank inheritance because there's not the same multiple matrilines operating within those groups.
But what would set the spotted hyenas apart? Why are they then social, the spotted hyenas?
Well, one big difference between the spotted hyenas and the other species of hyenas is that they do a lot more hunting of large ungulates. So they seem to be not just like so the aardwolf is one of the dog-like hyenas that is that feeds primarily on termites, but so they're the odd one out. The other 3 are 3 species of bone-cracking hyenas that are well adapted to scavenging. Particularly so for example, the striped hyena is primarily a scavenger, and so there's little opportunity for a competition with other species over their food source, whereas the spotted hyenas are living on in these African savanna landscapes where they're killing large ungulates and also competing with lions over the same kind of food base. So it's likely that this competition with lions is a major driver of their larger societies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sari. Next question, Francine.
Thank you. Thanks for a really interesting talk, and also all the questions and the answers. They've been fascinating. My question is, well, I have 2 questions that are related. One is when you showed that video of infanticide, and you mentioned that it was the dominant or more dominant female, and then her 2 daughters who were taking the infant from a subordinate female. So how subordinate was she? Was she the bottom of the ranking, or was she just below? Because you then interpreted that as this is removing competition. But if it's the lowest ranking female, that would be not very, I mean, my interpretation would be that's not very much competition. But if she's just below rank, then, then it makes sense to do that. Oh, not make sense, but it's understandable to interpret it that way. And just relating that, sorry, I should have started out. My name is Francine Dolans. I'm from the University of Michigan, Dearborn. Sorry, I should have said that. I study non-human primates, and the chimpanzees, the females who are incoming to groups, they're the lowest ranking females. Their offspring are usually targeted for infanticide. So I was just thinking of that in relation to this, that if it's the lowest ranking females, that would not be a competition model. So I was just curious about that. And then the other part of my question is about if it's demographic factors that are really changing the status and not so much genetic and so on, then how do you account for like what we would call with human societies microaggressions, and how that affects immune system, and how that then affects the demographics, right? I would see that as a combination of both social and also genetic. So someone's immune system who's more compromised or more open to being, reduced or reduced by these microaggressions would then go lower in rank because they get ill or they have less capacity to withstand those microaggressions. So the attack on the infants, for instance, would be, it's not even a microaggression, it's a macroaggression, but those aggressions would impact the immune systems. And how would that then play into the social status of individuals? So those are sort of two related parts to my comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Francine, for the question. So to start with your first question, which was that case of infanticide. So in that case and in others, the victims, the mother, the victim was not necessarily the next, match line down from the one who was committing infanticide. It also wasn't usually the very lowest one in the group, but it was one of the ones sort of in the middle. And you're suggesting that perhaps this is not what you would expect under the kind of competition idea that I put forward. And I think that I think that that's an interesting point. One thing I guess I would say is that it's not always the sort of next lowest match line that is the largest threat in terms of competition. So we have observed in our system lower ranking hyenas making their way up to the very top of the hierarchy. And we've observed sort of lower ranking match lines challenging the highest ranking match line for that position. So although perhaps it's not the greatest threat to if you imagine them trying to eliminate, allies to their potential rivals, it's potentially not their greatest rival, but it's not a non-source of competition. So I think it's still in line with that with that explanation. And then regarding like the role that sort of these kind of microaggressions or small aspects, everyday aspects of social living might accumulate to impact individuals in the group. So there's work by others has examined, for instance, the relationship between cortisol and rank in the system, finding that those lower ranking individuals are experiencing higher stress. And so you would expect that by this process of declining in rank over the lifespan, each of these individuals is kind of becoming over time, and as they age, more exposed to the sort of trials and tribulations of living in a social group and not being at the top of the social hierarchy.
I think Francine, do you have a follow-up, Francine, or that's?
I was just thinking about, so there's more mobility in what was being explained sort of earlier, and then the top ranking female has, I assume, no microaggressions or macroaggressions against her, or very rare. So she's going to maintain her position. So it would be really interesting to compare stress and immune in her position to some of the others, especially the middle ranking ones, if they're the ones who are going to be challenging her for a position. And so one would assume that she would have lower stressors and immune responses, stressor responses than the others do, who are both dealing with below and above. So I think in order to assess that hypothesis, I think it would be useful to do those kinds of analyses.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Francine. Our next question comes from Sergio.
Yeah. Hello to everyone. I'm Sergio Sanchez. I'm from the Rosario University. I'm a student of in the university. Biology students, and my work actually is for trying to make a relationship between microbiota and the social communication in mammals or social organization. But well, I have a question that is if you think, like, if we take other kind of behavior to measure the influence of the individual having other individuals, the organization of the hierarchy can change, or the way that we saw the nepotistic society. Because in your presentation you have an article of Rebecca J. Lewis that talks about specifically that kind of that we should consider that other kind of behaviors to say that an animal have power in his society, like maybe not only aggressive behaviors or aggressive, but maybe something like blackmail or even affiliative behavior. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, good question. I think you're right that we tend to gravitate towards these agonistic interactions primarily because they're easy to observe, and it's clear to see what's happening there. Whereas more affiliative social behaviors are also extremely important in these systems, and I think they're really the foundations of those coalitions and social alliances that we were talking about. And they're often harder to observe. I think a lot of work that's been focusing more on the affiliative side of these things has been done in the Cercopithecines and other primates, and that's because they have this really nice grooming behavior where they can kind of engage in this unambiguously pro-social interaction. In the hyenas, we have a little bit harder time teasing out what those unambiguous friendly social interactions are because they don't have this like really nice kind of bidirectional grooming thing that they do. So I think to some degree it's a product of the data that are, the behavioral interactions that are most observable and measurable. But I think you're right that there's a number of other processes that are likely operating in the system.
Yeah, maybe that kind of behavior is more easier to study in other species like the monkey that have the same nepotistic system, something like that, because they have they have more expressive in that kind of behaviors that affiliated than maybe hyenas. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks to you,
Thank
and
you.
very interesting talk.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Our next question comes from Linda Lani.
Hi everyone. So my name is Rendrani Makuya, and I'm a postdoc interested in energy benefits, cost and benefits of living, working in South Africa at the Technical Research Station. So thank you, Eli, for the talk. So my question, I'm more interested in if there's a line between when infanticide happens and when adoption happens, because one of your graphs, you showed that one of the causes of juvenile mortality was when the mother passes away. So when would it be that if that is the case, the juvenile is whether adopted or the juvenile is whether killed by another dominant female?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, so right, when the mother passes away, this leaves the juvenile pretty exposed to mortality. And what usually happens, unfortunately, is that the cub will starve to death because mother is not there to nurse it. And in hyenas, there's no allo nursing like we might see in cooperative breeders. Occasionally, there's a case of adoption, but it doesn't always happen when the mother dies. It may also occur with the mother still living, which leads to that, which led to that East et al. Study where they're looking at the rank of the genetic mother and the adopted mother. So it's hard those adoption cases are relatively rare, especially in our population. So it's a bit hard to say what drives those cases of adoption. It could be that it's a way to sort of bolster your social allies by adopting a new cub and bringing them into your match line. So that's a possibility, but we don't have the ability to ask that question at the moment. But in terms of the other thing I guess I would note about infanticide is that although it is operating in the system, it's also operating relatively rarely, particularly given the number of opportunities that these hyenas have to commit infanticide. So it's very common to see a bunch of cubs at the den with the mother. In fact, in that screenshot that I showed you, there's the one hyena that's killing another hyena, and I'd been there observing those hyenas interacting for months, and the mom had many opportunities to kill that cub previously and chose not to. So there's something that occurred that sort of triggered that decision, and that's something that we don't really quite know the answer to yet.
Thank you.
Well, now that you sort of finished, thank you, Linda, Lani. Well, my follow-up question is something you kind of just mentioned that you don't know, but I'm still going to ask the question. So what do you think hyenas see in potential rivals that drive the infanticide? Probably it's not about the cub, but about the mother. I don't know. Do you have any idea? Are they assessing things on the cubs, maybe?
Yeah, so we tried to investigate that to the best of our ability. So a lot of we didn't even talk about hyena pseudopenises at all today, but for those of you who don't know, males and females are very difficult to distinguish in hyenas because the females have genitalia that look exactly like the males. And what this means is that when you are observing baby hyenas, it's quite difficult. It takes a number of observations to be able to identify the sex for each individual. And as a result, many of the cubs that are killed went into that infanticide data set had unknown sex. But one of the hypotheses about actually that evolution of that pseudopenis has to do with infanticide protection. So we decided to investigate whether males or females might be more preferentially targeted during cases of infanticide. And we found that it was about 50-50 with our small number of, I think we had 9 sexed cubs that were killed, and there was 4 males and 5 females, if I recall correctly. So it was not, we found no evidence that there was at least a sex difference in which cub was being targeted. And in terms of what is the decision-making criteria for potential killers, I don't know. They could be assessing something about the size of the matriline or the strength of social alliances among the mother and making a decision based on that. Or it could be something about their relationship with that individual. I think I would start there in terms of asking that question.
Just a quick follow-up before I call Suleima. Do you know if they can tell apart males from females when they are cubs? If mothers can tell apart males from female cubs?
I don't know. I would be surprised if they can't, but I don't think that we have evidence either way for that.
Yeah,
but they're very olfactory animals, and I would be pretty surprised. I've never really been particularly convinced by the idea that the sort of visual similarity between male and female genitalia is really fooling the hyenas.
Okay, yeah, that was the key point there.
Yeah.
Suleima?
Yeah, this is also a follow-up, and you may just have answered this because I had a quick interruption, so I may have missed it. Are there certain females that are more likely to commit infanticide? And if so, what would the characteristics be? Did you already answer this?
Not really, but
Okay.
Primarily we found that it's the highest ranking females are the ones who are doing the majority of that. There may also be some individual differences in their tendency to do that, but we don't have enough observations to really distinguish that. But we had some repeat offenders and many individuals that have, to our knowledge, never committed infanticide. So, but what is clear is that it's almost exclusively done by the highest ranking members of the group in our data set.
Okay, and then the other question I had is, what is the current status of what we know about siblicide, like the newborns fighting and killing each other? And how common is it? Do you think it makes any difference in the long run in terms of social dynamics and so on?
Yeah, good question. So there's some, so to kind of answer this question with some historical context, for a while, people thought that hyenas were committing suicide a lot because hyenas are born with a full set of teeth, and when a twin litter is born, they kind of immediately begin squabbling over which one is going to be the dominant, and sometimes even the subordinate ones will get kind of injured or have patches of fur missing, and so there's some damage that's being done during this process, and so for a while, people thought that when you saw a litter of only one, that this meant that that one had killed its sibling. However, there was a really nice study from Kay's group a few years ago that did ultrasounds on wild hyenas and found that, in fact, that typically when there was a litter of one, it's because there was only one baby in utero. That said, in the Serengeti, where conditions are significantly harsher, and there's a long-term study of hyenas going on there, they document a lot more cases of facultative siblicide. So this is siblicide via competition over access to milk. And so when conditions are harsh, the dominant cub can exclude the subordinate cub to the extent that it starves to death. And so siblicide does occur in that context there. But we almost never see that in the Mara, where in the Masai Mara, where the conditions are a little bit more favorable.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Sulaiman. Students?
Hello, everyone. I'm Kuleo Mbanjwa. I'm studying social ecology of small mammals in Hukap at SKRS, South Africa. So my question is quite similar to that of Francine and Lindeland, but just a small slight differences. So for the first one was on the graph you shown, where the high rankings would have more individuals or more offsprings, pushing down the other individuals on the other end. So now I want to check in terms of infanticide, how do they manage to prevent infanticide, especially the ones that are at high rankings? Do they have, in some cases, their offsprings being attacked? How do they manage that? Because it seems like as a high-ranking individual, you tend to have larger family or many offsprings. But now I want to see if do they have mechanisms to prevent predation against their own offsprings.
Yeah,
Thanks.
excellent question. Yeah, thanks. So one thing that all hyenas do to prevent infanticide, at least to the best of their ability, is that they will have their babies in a little secluded private den. So in general, the cubs are reared at a communal den, like the picture I showed you with a bunch of cubs next to each other. There's offspring from different mothers that are reared together, and that's like a major process of social development, like I was discussing in the talk. But most cubs are not born at that communal den. They're born in a private den that's kind of far away. And we think that the reason they do that is to minimize the opportunities for infanticide against their newly born cubs. So that is one thing that all of the hyenas are doing to try to prevent infanticide. In terms of what might be protecting the highest ranked individuals from infanticide specifically, I think a big part of it is the fact that because they have been historically reproductively successful, they have a bunch of their kin that are also present at the den, that are there, that can help them chase off other hyenas, or in general intervene on behalf of their cubs to prevent infanticide. So I think that is one answer to your question. And another potential answer that I would be really curious to study, but I don't have evidence for, is that I wonder to what extent, like, the knowledge of infanticide information about infanticide can travel among individuals. So, like, for instance, well, take, for example, the case where a cub is killed in the presence of the mother. That mother witnesses this action happening, and that presumably is not very good for the relationship between the mom and the one who committed the infanticide. And maybe there's no consequences for the highest ranked individual who is already the most dominant one in the group and doesn't really care if a subordinate female, doesn't like it. But if the situation is reversed and a subordinate female kills the cub of a really high ranked female, they could find themselves potentially being harassed or bullied by that high ranked female for a long time. So and that's a bit of speculation, but I think that that's probably playing some role here as well.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Carson?
Yes, my name is Carsten Schradin, a researcher at the CNRS in Strasbourg, France, doing lots of fieldwork in South Africa. Yes, thank you for an interesting talk. I have a follow-up question. I mean, maybe my understanding is, if it's wrong, then my question doesn't make so much sense, that infanticide mainly is thought to function to reduce competition for their own offspring. If that's the case, my question is, until what age or size are infants killed, and why does it stop at any stage? Because for a big adult hyena, even a juvenile, if she would encounter it somewhere alone, she could easily, I would imagine, kill it, and with this reduce competition for her juveniles. So until what age does infanticide occur, and why does it stop at some stage? When are they not vulnerable anymore to infanticide?
Good question. So we found that about 7 months old is when they when the rates, like 6 to 7 months old is when the rates of infanticide decline quite intensely, and that is or the risk of infanticide, I should say, and that is about halfway through, maybe a little more than halfway through the den dependent period, to provide some context in terms of the overall that overall cub phase. And so yeah, I think your point is that these females, these like fully grown adult female hyenas, are big and have powerful jaws and can kill a wildebeest. So surely they can kill a cub that's 7 months old. I think that's an excellent point. And yeah, I don't really have a great answer for why they may stop at that stage. I think I could think of one potential explanation, which is that at least from the examples of infanticide that I've observed, as the cubs are younger, they really are it's like a single crunch. The hyena walks up there, bites the cub, and it's instantly killed. As those hyenas get older, it's a lot more difficult for them. It's more of a extended attack, and the cubs then have the opportunity to run into the den, and those dens are not big enough for adults to get inside. So the cubs are protected not only from lions and kind of the more traditional predators in the dens, but they're also protected from potentially infanticidal females. So in that image that I showed you of the high-ranking female killing a cub, in that case, like, she attacked the cub and it ran to the den. It actually almost escaped inside, but she managed to get it and pull it back out again. So I think that as those cubs get older, one potential explanation is that they're more able to defend themselves, not by actually defending themselves, but by escaping into the den hole quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. So I'm gonna ask another question, and then depends on how things go. I'm shifting the topic a little bit. So my understanding is, like, queens, they're always going to be the dominant female unless they die, or they are taken down by other females that form coalitions. Is that how it works? And if that's the case, so I'm gonna just finish it. So if that's the case, then these coalitions, are they formed by females from the same matriline, from different matrilines? What kind of relationship is, like, hold together this coalitionary game?
Yeah. So for your first section, I think that is a lot of how females reign at the top ends, is either by dying or by being taken over. But it's not the only way, at least if we're willing to distinguish between cases where maybe she's overthrown by another coalition from ones in which she kind of steps down of her own volition. So there are some cases where we've witnessed no extended fight over that top role, but at some point, instead of the mom that's been the queen for many years, her daughter has overtaken her and is the new highest ranking one. And there's some evidence in baboons that females are doing this in a kind of volitional way, passing their status on to their daughters. And so it's possible that this might also be happening in hyenas. But it's a little bit hard to say because it's hard to demonstrate the absence of one of those things, especially for an animal like this that does a lot of stuff at night when we're not observing them. And the second part of your question was, sorry, I feel like there was a second half to that.
Yeah, well, about the collision.
Oh yeah, kinship
which
and
individuals
coalitions.
form it, yes.
Yeah. So I have a short and a long answer to that. The short answer is that it's usually kin, like members of a matrilineal coalition together, but not always. Sometimes they coalition with other members of the group. And then the long answer is that I've been talking about matrilines as though they're clearly defined, but they're actually kind of confusing because because as one female is extremely, reproductively successful and her daughters have daughters, soon whether the question of whether you're looking at one matriline or four matrilines can arise because they're sort of these nested structures where if you kind of look at the overarching female like progenitor, everyone is descended from her, but at some point, some of those hyenas are not actually that closely related to the original progenitor, and they may in fact be competing primarily within their matriline, sort of like the Plantagenets murdering each other over the English throne. So I think that there's some really interesting stuff to be done looking at the social relationships and kinship as kind of competing forces here, because I think that kinship may not be the full story. But for now, what we know is that kinship is playing a large role in structuring these alliances.
Oh, that sounds really cool, like something to look into more in detail. Okay, so I think we don't have any more questions, so I'm gonna close our YouTube stream. And if you want, we can stay a little bit longer. And before I close, I wanna thank Eli for such a great talk and everyone for staying and for a great discussion. And I hope to see you again next week for